South African-born actress Charlize Theron created a language frenzy when, during an interview, she said that there were only about 44 people who still spoke Afrikaans. This has created considerable debate about whether Afrikaans is in fact still a thriving language. According to Professor Thabo Ditesele, a sociolinguist at the Tshwane University of Technology, it all depends on one's lived reality. And he joins us now for that conversation. Thank you so much for making time, Prof. And I saw that the PEN South African Language Board released a statement on this issue, calling the comments that she made disturbing but also inaccurate. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you very much, Clement, and good afternoon to your viewers. Yeah, I saw the statement, and yeah, I mean, PEN South African Language Board is the custodian of language in South Africa. So one expected them to come out very strongly to condemn, you know, and correct the inaccuracies that were made by Charlize Theron. And I've also been paying attention to what is happening, you know, on social media. And my perspective is very, very different. My perspective is that of, you know, which lenses do we use every time when we analyze language? Generally, we use one that is based on a community. We never pay attention to individuals, and we also have an expectation that everybody who is a home language speaker will be passionate. So if that person doesn't show the same passion that we have, you know, we gang up against the person and, you know, throw everything at them.
I mean, my understanding, just to deal with the factual matters of this particular case, my understanding is that Afrikaans is the third most spoken language in the country. Is that still right in terms of the statistics?
That is still correct. It is the third most spoken language in the country. And by the way, Afrikaans has tentacles even outside the SADC region. I mean, if you go to places like Australia, New Zealand, the United Kingdom, Canada, even in California, very close to where Charlize is in San Diego, there are quite a number of Afrikaans speakers. So when we fact check here, it's really not spoken by 44 people. But then one has to look at the context in which she said 44 people.
Yeah, because I don't also think that she actually meant it literally. You know, I don't think that's particularly the case. But perhaps even the context with which she said it somehow tells a story of what message she was trying to send out.
Yes, firstly, we have to look at the audience she was addressing. I mean, she was speaking to an American audience. Now, let's look at what that entails. Now, Afrikaans has, you know, people who speak it as a home language, about 8 million. That's kind of like the whole population of the 5 boroughs of New York. Now, if a language is limited to just that northeastern part of the United States, by American terms, it is a small language. So she was addressing an American audience, and I listened to her interview. He began by saying it's spoken by a very tiny population. Now, if you look at 8 million relative to 8 billion, you know, population of the world, that's 0.1%. I mean, 0.1% is very tiny. So how do we react to this? We look at this interview as if it was done in Pretoria or in Johannesburg. We don't give it an international, you know, dynamic that was in it.
Yeah. What do you think is, because when you look at the statement by the South African Language Board, they are saying that the comments perpetuate the persistent misconception that Afrikaans is only spoken by the white, you know, Boer South Africans who could not be, and this could not be further from the truth, as they clarify, you know, the factual inaccuracies. But what misconceptions do you think people still have about the Afrikaans language? Because far apart from what Charlize Theron meant, what she has said has now started a debate about this particular language in South Africa.
Yes, thanks for the question, Clement. You know, what tends to happen is that it's factually correct that the majority of people who speak Afrikaans as a home language are not white. That is an established fact. But you have to look at who tends to be the defenders of Afrikaans. It doesn't tend to be non-white speakers.
Yeah.
So internationally, an impression is created that people who claim it as custodians happen to be white. That explains why people would still call it a language of oppression, a language that should not even be, some political parties don't even sing the STEM version. That's how much they associate it with the past. So there's context to why it would be associated with 40% of its speaker population as opposed to 60%.
Mm. And in terms of the perceptions people still have, you've indicated that some people still refer to it as, the language of oppression. As you rightly say, there are some groups, even political groups, that do not even participate in the Afrikaans version of our South African national anthem. What does that kind of approach do, Prof, to, I don't want to say race relations, but just broadly to, how we respect and look at each other's languages, and we don't think others are more superior than the others?
The biggest elephant in the room is that we've never really had a language codessa. We just assumed that once we say we have 11 official languages, everything will fall into place. I mean, look at the contestations that we currently have at university. There are people who hold a view that, when political parties fight for Afrikaans survival at universities and use the term multilingualism, they're just taking along speakers of other African languages. What they're really after is the past. They are nostalgic about what used to happen in the past, where South Africa had two official languages, English and Afrikaans. So people look at the status of English. It hasn't been threatened. They look at the status of Afrikaans. It's not where it was 30 years ago. So nostalgia, in my view, is the one that motivates people to say, we want it to go back to its glory days. And then for convenience, speakers of languages such as Sepedi like you, Setswana like me, are being tagged so that we buy into this narrative that we are fighting for multilingualism, when in fact the fight is about bilingualism, English Afrikaans bilingualism.
Yeah. But even with that, Prof, that bilingualism, what basis do those who make these decisions have to make it English and particularly Afrikaans? I'm asking that because, there's a conversation we need to have about the advancement of the other official languages. If you look at the higher learning institutions, I went to an institution that had Afrikaans as part of their official languages at the institution. It was very difficult for a village boy to even understand what the lecturers were saying, and you are stuck in a lecture hall with people who understand the language, and you're expected to still do the assignments, pass the exams. So there's a level of injustice in that. So how do we advance the other languages so that Afrikaans is not seen as, it's on a pedestal, it's more superior, especially by those who defend it and want to argue injustice when you add other languages like, make English official and maybe is Xhosa as well, in cases of Stellenbosch, for instance?
The first thing that we need to do, Clement, is to, like I said, I suggest a language in Daba, where we will iron all these issues. But the contestation right now is that of, the power that Afrikaans used to have and has lost. So the idea is to salvage that power. And that happens in a context where the 9 African languages are trying to emerge. So there's contestation for space, in the public domain. So until we find each other, until we say the development of a language should be proportionate to its size. For instance, Afrikaans is a 14.5% language. But if you look at its tentacles in business and trade, it's far more than 14%. So you could argue that it has, its development, its where it touches is far beyond its size of 14%. I mean, a language like Sepedi is a 9% language, but you don't feel it's 9% because of this contestation that we see.
Yeah. So how do you deal with then the perception that, sure, keep Afrikaans, and you understand how broad the language is, and not only in terms of the numbers, but as you say, in terms of its tentacles and where it is often used in other spaces. But then you also have the reality, and this was indicated in that report in Stellenbosch by Justice Kampempe, that there are people who actually not just use the language, but also the culture and that nostalgia you spoke about that comes with the people who adore this language. And often it's that culture, that makes many institutions not to be so inclusive for people that may not even speak the language.
It's this thing of accepting that, South Africa is now a unitary state where space has to be shared. I mean, right now, there is, a big debate about amendments that have to be made on the South African Schools Act. The battle there really is about space, we have schools that have remained Afrikaans medium, even in an area whose demographics have been changing. I mean, I used to live in Centurion, and I can tell you that a lot has not changed in 30 years. The majority of schools in Centurion are still Afrikaans medium when the demographics of the town have changed in the last. And that causes a lot of frustration, a lot of dissatisfaction with black parents who may want their kids to go to the nearest school, but then they are told, no, you can't come to this school. So the options really would be limited. At last count, there are about 4 to 5 schools that newly arrivals in Centurion could go to. But if you look at the number of Afrikaans medium schools that were there, far outweighs the size of the population of African speakers. So this is the debate that we need in South Africa to say, how do we share resources? Because, you remember the case of Hoërskool MLO, another high school in Vanderbijlpark, where the community was adamant that it wasn't going to change its language policy. So such contestations need a broader discussion.
Now, Prof, maybe we will have that language codesa at some point. Thank you for making time for us. Professor Thabo Ditesele, speaking to us there about the debate that's been caused by those comments that Charlize Theron made.